Welcome to a talk by architect and founder of Rex in New York City, Joshua Ramus. His presentation is hosted by the architectural forum, Space.CitySeattle. My name is Grant Gustafson. I'm vice president and one of the founders. With this season, we are approaching 90 events since our start in 1997. Space City is 100% volunteer. We do 4 to 6 events a year, kind of a steady pace. We're excited to announce 3 upcoming lectures. Kendall Latham, he's going to be here April 18th. He's the head of retail design at Glossier. Jennifer Bonner is coming May 16th. She's an architect, researcher, educator from Los Angeles, and I think I heard Portland. Michael Beirut and Johnny Sikov will speak on September 26th. They're graphic designers at Pentagram, and they happen to be our pro bono branding and marketing graphic support. So everything you see lately is by Pentagram. So please check our website. It's up to date, as is Eventbrite for those 3 talks. Tickets are available. Thanks for your support by attending tonight. And we hope you can make it to our reception after the talk. That's going to be at LMN's The Shop, about 6 blocks that way. It's a great space, model shop that they're giving us to use for things like this. Great gift to the design community. So I thought it'd be great tonight to ask MKA here to give Joshua's introduction, knowing they've developed this special bond and friendship. Their first project with Joshua was this building, starting in 1999, and while you were with OMA. MKA's been involved with nearly every project and competition submitted by Rex ever since, the relationship coming up on 25 years. Jay Taylor is a structural engineer here in Seattle who has been with MKA until his recent retirement. He's going to introduce Joshua. Jay's he was at MKA 25 years. The last 20 years he led their cultural and civic project studio. Jay's projects with Joshua, where he was acting as the PM and managing principal and partner at some point, right? On the Seattle Central Library Museum, the Museum Plaza in Louisville, Dee and Charles Wiley Performing Arts Center in Dallas, the Perelman Performing Arts Center at Ground Zero in New York City, Lindemann Performing Arts Center at Brown University in Providence. And I brought this show on the cover. This is back November architecture record. Beautiful project. And then multiple design competition submissions. So Jay, would you please introduce our speaker?
Thank you, Grant. Appreciate that. This is a real treat for me to be able to introduce my good friend Joshua Ramus, especially being able to do it here in this space and in this building. Not only was it the first collaboration between MKA and Josh, it was Josh and my first collaboration together and continued on for 25 years. I met Joshua almost within a few months 25 years ago, just down the street in the conference room at MKA. And at that time, Josh and Rem Koolhaus were there, and we were interviewing. So it was John Magnuson, myself, and a couple other of MKA team were interviewing to be the structural and civil engineers for this project. We were fortunate to have been selected to be the structural engineer of record and the civil engineer of record for the project. But personally, for me, I feel truly blessed in what has turned out to be 25 years of collaboration and friendship with Joshua Ramus. In many ways, I've had a front row seat on Josh's career, which I know firsthand has not always been easy, which I also know his achievements are hard-earned, well-deserved, and absolutely amazing. Before the establishment of his acclaimed firm, Rex, Josh was instrumental in shaping the architectural landscape through his founding role at OMA New York. It was here that Joshua honed his visionary approach, returning to his Puget Sound roots to lead the design of this iconic building that we're in today, the Seattle Central Library, a project that not only showcased his architectural prowess, but also set a precedent for innovative use of public space. This early success laid the groundwork for his future endeavors, driving him to explore new architectural frontiers with Rex. The 2023 Perelman Performing Arts Center at the heart of Ground Zero at World Trade Center site in New York City stands both as a beacon of resilience and also an architectural expression. Its dynamic, adaptable design reflects Joshua's vision for buildings that can transform to meet the evolving needs of the clients and the community. Similarly, Lindemann Performing Arts Center at Brown University captures the academic environment while serving as a hub for cultural exchange. Featured prominently on the cover of Architectural Record, this project further cements Josh and Rex's reputation for career landmark institutions. Under his leadership, Rex has emerged as a think tank for diverse talents, with Josh remaining deeply involved and engaged in every facet of the firm's work. His approach marries functionality with aesthetic ambition, crafting spaces that anticipate the future while addressing present demands. Josh has been recognized for his contributions to the field with numerous accolades, including being the first American to win the prestigious Marcus Prize in 2016. His influence has been acknowledged by publications like the New York Times, Architectural Digest, Icon, Esquire, and Fast Company, which have all cited him among the world's most significant architects and design influencers. Josh has been instrumental in Rex's creation of a varied portfolio that includes cultural icons and state-of-the-art workspaces, all marked by his commitment to innovative design. His work, acclaimed for its contextual acuity and user-centric perspective, often unfolds as a dialogue between simplicity and complexity. Beyond his architectural practice, Josh has shared his insights as a visiting professor at several prestigious and esteemed institutions, including Yale and Harvard. He was an early member of the TED Advisory Board, a speaker at TED conferences and symposiums worldwide. His educational background is as distinguished as his professional one, with a master's in architecture from Harvard, where he earned the inaugural Araldo Casuta Fellowship and the SOM Fellowship, and a Bachelor of Arts in Philosophy from Yale, where he graduated magna cum laude and with distinction in the major. Josh's work at Rex continues to shape the built environment, infusing it with a potent mix of beauty and practicality that continues to define the next wave of architectural excellence. I am deeply honored to introduce my dear friend, Joshua Ramus. Thank you. Thank you.
Let me start first with an apology and an acknowledgement. The apology is that I've been suffering with allergies, and I took an industrial strength analgesic, and it has made me really spacey. So this is going to be a bit of an experiment. I was meeting friends beforehand, and at some point they looked at me and said, "Are you okay?" The answer is not necessarily, so we'll see how that goes. And the acknowledgement is that when we did this building, now we started 25 years ago, I didn't know how good I had it at the time. It's important to acknowledge that this was a true collaboration between two firms, OMA and LMN, and it was not a design architect, executive architect relationship. It was a pure collaboration. We all worked on it from start to finish, and a number of those people are here, and I just think it has to be known that the power of both those firms came to bear on the project. I'm going to try and keep this more informal. Do you mind? Yeah. I'm going to treat this more like we're talking to family. And I want to talk about what I think is the most important thing in architecture, which I just call empowerment. And dumbing it down, just the way I like to say it is, I believe that architecture should do things. And I want to expound upon that. And the title of the lecture is Rethinking Flexibility. The single most important way that in our practice that we have found that we can empower people through architecture is through flexibility. So that's why I really want to focus on flexibility. Before I do that, I want to talk about something slightly different. Can I get just a show of hands of how many people here, how many are architects? Okay, so it's more than half. Okay, so I'm going to try and balance this between talking to architects and talking to non-architects. What I want to say is that in my experience, the architectural profession is a little weird when it comes to how we treat people who evolve ideas. We're totally comfortable when people evolve aesthetics. That's kind of what we're used to. But my observation is that when people are evolving ideas, either their own or other people's, somehow we're suspicious of that. And I'll be really blunt. We will post projects that I'm most proud of, projects that have taken ideas and learned from a previous project and advanced it again. And I'm always amazed at those are the projects where people will say, oh, they're just recycling ideas. They're a one-trick pony. And I find that really odd. I mean, in any other intellectual pursuit, you can actually get a Nobel Prize for advancing yours or someone else's work and not even completing it. But in ours, there's this suspicion about it. So, I'd prefer not to call it recycling, because that to me is literally just using the same thing over and over again. I like to call it re-evolve. And what I mean by that is we very often, when we're starting a project, we will look at a previous project of ours or somebody else, and then we try to understand it and we try to advance it. So it's a re-evolution each time. And we'll do that with ideas about program and organization and functionality and so forth. We'll also do that with ideas about aesthetics. So throughout this lecture, I'm just going to keep referring often to previous ideas or previous things, be they organizational, functional, or aesthetic. And so a good example, this is a project that we've just started construction on in Brisbane. Basic idea is pretty simple. It's, we have these large oval-shaped brise-soleil elements that we discovered actually perform exceptionally well, particularly in that sun angle, work very, very well. They're tailored to the different facets of the building. We thought they were incredibly beautiful. As I said, they performed at a very, very high level. They also created what we like to say a kind of phenomena as opposed to form. We really loved it. And so that idea, when we started working on a project that we're in the middle of design development in Brooklyn on the waterfront, we took that same idea of an oval-shaped oculi, took all of the research and data that we had been developing in the previous project and applied it in a different way here, actually combining brise-soleil and balconies around the perimeter of the building. There you see the oculi on the face of the building. Here you see the effect of the sort of mannerism that happens on the side of the building, just to give you some sense of the aesthetic impact. Okay, so that's just an example where I'm going to refer to things. I have to be honest, part of the reason I included that little spiel is I didn't know how to bring those two projects into the discussion. So now we've got it. Okay, so empowerment. As I said, for us, it's really focused on flexibility. And what I'm going to try to do during the lecture is I'm going to try and put forward a whole bunch of ideas that I think are new ideas about flexibility. They may not be new to all of you. I'm just saying to us and the way we're approaching our thinking, that we're starting to categorize them in different ways and to challenge everyone to think about flexibility in a different way. our observation is that as a profession, we have been using an outdated idea of flexibility that we inherited from the modernists, and they started it in the 1920s. So we're literally been using it for 100 years. And that idea is, the idea of a blank slate, or because we're architects, we like to complicate things, we call it a tabula rasa on which or in which we can, in theory, do anything. That was the big modernist idea. My favorite architect in the world, Mies van der Rohe, he loved that. He probably took it to the extreme. If you know the Neue National Gallery, it is exquisitely beautiful and it is an absolute nightmare to do anything in. And it is a nightmare because, just as you see, so I think we can take this idea and apply it to all kinds of typologies, but it's particularly acute in visual and performing arts. In the visual, it's the white cube, and the performing arts is the black box. And referring back to the Neue National Gallery, similar idea in a museum, white cube, and therefore it's not even a white cube, it's just a vacuous cube, is that it takes an enormous amount of capital in order to change it, right? We've seen a weird inversion over the last maybe 50 years where, say about 50 years ago, it was relatively easy to raise money for operational budgets. Right? I can remember when I was a kid, we'd watch PBS and it would say, this year of PBS is sponsored by First Boston. Good luck getting First Boston to sponsor a year of anything at this point. And at that time, it was pretty difficult to raise capital costs for buildings. And now it's very difficult to raise capital budgets, and it's impossible to raise operational budgets. So we have all these buildings that use this idea of a tabula rasa that are straitjackets because no one has the money to transform them. And so that is at the core of what I want you to think about as I start going through different examples. And almost to a T, and everything I'm going to say started for me intellectually when we developed this building, which was that the idea, weirdly, of a lot of specificity, tailored specificity, was wildly more flexible than this kind of rote idea of universal flexibility. So I'm going to start here. When we started this project in 1999, it was a really interesting moment in the evolution of libraries and architecture. What we were seeing at that moment was two simultaneous explosions, one of media and one of social responsibility. And pretty much no one knew what to do at that moment. And when our whole group went and looked at buildings, this is what we typically saw. We saw a lot of beautiful pieces of architecture, really well-considered pieces of architecture. So if you know what this building is, I am not slagging it off. It is a great building. But the way it approached flexibility was this tabula rasa idea. Right? The reading room looked like the magazine collection, looked like the children's collection, and they just shuffled stuff around because they basically didn't know how to hedge their bets on the evolution of a public library. So we started this project. We explicitly knew that's not what we did not want to do. So we combed through the program, and we made a series of what you see on the left. We call them platforms. Those were clusters of program that were sort of similar things plugged into them. And then the things on the right, those were more universal things that looked more like a tabula rasa, but we wanted to give them very specific characters. And those got sized into what you're now experiencing. We call them the five platforms. Each one has a distinct architectural palette, distinct circulation, and most importantly, a distinct form of flexibility. And then there's the in-between spaces that act kind of like a public park that has been wrapped up vertically into the building. Right, and that's why the building has the very distinct characters you move through it. It's basically experiencing 5 different buildings with this continuous public park that runs through it. That was the evolution of the thinking of the building. But let me give you an explicit example of how this idea of compartmentalization led to really profitable flexibility. I'm going to talk specifically about the book spiral and a mixing chamber, which are the two things that we collectively, I think, really invented for this project, and talk about why they became what they are. Because I think people know that there's a big book spiral up there, but I don't think they necessarily understand what the thinking was behind it. It really had to do with this. Now, this was 2007, so we were starting in 1999, but even in 1999, we were seeing a lot of predictions about how access to information was going to become ubiquitous, and that public libraries were no longer going to be the place that you came to access your full breadth of information. And therefore, we had to think of a paradigm shift in order to spend, at that time, I think it was $111.8 million, $111.9 million of public money, right? We had a lot of people saying how that should be spent. And the observation was, if access to information is no longer going to be what makes a public library unique, it's going to be access to curation that's going to make it unique, right? That we needed to make a building that was librarian-centric, not book, not physical material-centric. And that was the birth of the mixing chamber. Right? Historically, librarians were used as docents. It's a pity because you have no idea how educated most public librarians are. And most of the time what they're doing is helping you find something. So incredible disuse of intelligence. What we wanted to do is create the mixing chamber. We could bring all these incredibly intelligent, sophisticated people together, and they could kind of dogpile you and help you refine your search. And if you needed to go find something, they could send you out to do it. The problem was this. This is what books collections typically looked like. And that's why these incredibly intelligent people were being used as docents. So before we could create the mixing chamber, we had to solve this problem. How could we get the public to be able to self-navigate? And that's where the idea of the book spiral came in, right? That the books are organized 000 to 999. Believe it or not, we did actually originally propose to put 000 at the top and 999 at the bottom, you see in this diagram, with the belief that it'd be easier to circulate down, but the library very rightly said that's just so bizarre, we can't endorse it. So that's not what happened. And then it's literally just a parking structure, right? I mean, believe it or not, as much as people burn books, books don't burn as much as cars. So it's actually a much simpler problem to solve than even a parking structure. And then within that system, it's why the Dewey Decimal System is in the floor and in the elevators, is it's literally as you have more and more and more books and you have micro explosions and contractions, the books through reshelving, just as they take different geometries on the book spiral, you just change the floor mats or you change the numbering that's in the elevator. So everyone can navigate with the Dewey Decimal System. That pulls the librarians out of these fiefdoms of materials and allows them to aggregate in the mixing chamber. Okay, so that, for me, was an unbelievably astonishing moment of, oh, wait, tailored flexibility is, tailored flexibility, really tailored specificity, is incredibly flexible, and it went completely against everything I thought I had understood about what was flexibility in architecture. And so that started this, what I think has become now a 25-year-long obsession about flexibility. And we call now, within our office, we call that approach divide and conquer. Let me give you two examples of, actually I think it's just one, of using divide and conquer in a different way. In this case, this is a tower that's under construction, or two towers under construction in Perth, Australia. They're mixed use. They have offices, hotel, residential, and retail. We took the office and we divided them into their unique components. We didn't create an overarching form. I think that's one of the big mistakes we had seen in multi-use buildings, right? You create a form, but then that form, it becomes very difficult to allow the the different programs to evolve during design. So we just, okay, let's just make these discrete boxes. We're only going to put the offices in one. We're going to put the hotel and residential in another. We're going to make, in the center of the building, let's see if this works, yeah. In the center of the building, we're going to take all of the amenities and put them in the middle all together. So if there's a gymnasium, it's the gym for the hotel and the residence and the offices. And there are several reasons for that. Urbanistically, what was weird about this development is it sits within Elizabeth Quay. All of these buildings are identical mixed-use buildings, and they all have things like ballrooms. They're all at the bases of the building. So if we had followed that, there would nothing that would set our building apart. And also things like ballrooms are not particularly great for activating the ground plane. So by putting things like the ballroom on the 27th floor, not only is that the place people want to rent out for their wedding and not the other ones that are at the base of the building, but that allowed us at the base of the building to completely evacuate it and provide retail and other public amenity at the base. So basically, pun intended, kind of turning the model of the other 6 projects around us on their heads. But coming back to this idea of divide and conquer, all of that amenity space in the middle, but we took the dimensions that, from a performance standpoint, the developers absolutely wanted. So if they said, I needed a floor plate of X by Y, and we need Z amount of stuff, we literally just made it, and we promised them, look, let us come up with a composition while maintaining those things that we think will be elegant. There were several ideas baked into that. Which is that once you do that, you now have the power to allow the building to fluctuate with the market. We have done several very large projects like this, and they all die. Why do they die? Because it takes 6, 7, 8, sometimes 9 years to start from design, ultimate to completion, and markets change, and at some point, the developer almost always gets cold feet and pulls the plug. We didn't want that to happen. So this was a way of safeguarding the project for us too, that if we keep these different elements isolated, we could allow them literally to fluctuate like a stereo equalizer. What that meant is that we didn't actually, let me show you actually images that we showed. This is not advancing, which is there. Images that we showed during the initial competition, which is that, look, you see how it's fluctuating. I suspect that some of those you might like more than others. I bet if I had frozen it and not shown you, you probably wouldn't have necessarily known that these were different, radically different compositions or relationships of amount of stuff. And what this meant is they reduced their risk. Let's say it was going to take us 4 years to get into the ground. It allows them to reduce their risk to just 3 months, because that's the amount of time it would take us to freeze the overall envelope, send it to a wind tunnel test, design the foundations, and start construction. So already, you're a huge step ahead of a conventional large mixed-use development. And the second was that by placing all that complexity up in the middle of the building, it had another profound positive, which is that by the time we needed to know what that stuff was, it was going to be about 2.5 years into construction. And we'd already frozen the structure and the envelope. So we'd frozen about 95% of the cost, which meant that the developer and the contractor kind of didn't care what we did in there. And so they let us go nuts. All right, so here you see what was going on in these different arms of the amenity spaces. They're all done out of lightweight, highly sustainable materials, so that this is also another form of flexibility, which is that they could allow these to cycle and to change, every 5, 6, 7 years, because it's all done out of lightweight, highly sustainable elements. Right, so anything that we design could also be changed easily during design, but it could also be changed easily during the life of the building. And this is what I mean by they let us go nuts, right? They didn't care that we were proposing just totally bonkers things, because we could only mess with about 5% of the overall cost. And they weren't going to, as I said, they wouldn't get to this until about 2.5 years into the construction cycle. So imagine what that meant is that first, we could advance all the construction documents incredibly fast, right? We could basically get into starting the foundations about 9 months in, of which they only had risk for about 3 of those 9 months. So as a tool, divide and conquer was incredibly profitable. And this idea then we've taken now to a tower that's in Mexico City. In this case, for various reasons, we actually could equate even the office floors with the residential and the hotel. And you can see, again, we took all the complexity of the amenities and stuck it up in the same. So it has very similar ideas. Its embodiment is quite different. The potentials are tweaked because we're working in Mexico and not in Australia. We're dealing with different codes. We're dealing with different clients. The expectations for the office, for the speculative offices were different in the different markets. But you can see how this one idea evolved and actually was generative into different architectural manifestations. Okay, so that's the first idea, this idea of divide and conquer. The second one we started to call presets. And this, if the Seattle Library was the most important one, this one had its genesis out of probably the second most important project in our early evolution, and that was the D. and Charles Wiley Theater. It is a highly flexible theater. I'm about to show two projects that are performing arts centers as opposed to theaters, and what I mean by that is really this is about stage theater, where the two other buildings I'm about to show can do theater, dance, opera, film, multimedia, small ensemble work, in one case, symphonic work, and so forth. So they allow for typological difference, whereas this is predominantly for theater. And on this project, we postulated an idea, and the proof of concept was kind of overwhelming. So this was us trying to diagram that idea of a black box, right? If you can say, in theory, this is the continuum of anything I should be able to do in a black box. What happens, and what happened in the case of the Wiley Theater's antecedent, the building we were replacing, is they built one thing into that black box, and they were never able to change it again. They built something into it called a thrusinium. They never had the money to change it, and so they basically were a fixed theater in a banal space. And so the proposition was, I should say, and yes, they do mess with it a little bit, but that's about it, right? That when I just fuzzed it out, that's about the full breadth of flexibility that they got. And so the proposal was, what if instead of creating a black box, we create a tool that does, there's 5 markers there. For the Wiley Theater, it was only 4, but 4 very distinct things along that continuum. Each one of those configurations we know have excellent acoustics, intimacy, and sightlines. We know the amount of time, the amount of people, and the amount of money to convert it. And wouldn't that actually prove to be far more flexible than a black box? And we went a step further and we said, and won't they probably screw with each of those also? And if you squint, weirdly, incredible specificity is getting you almost the full spectrum that black box promised but never delivered. Now, the proof of concept in the Wiley was that in the first 4 years, we stopped counting at the end of 2013, they did 28 shows in 25 configurations, and we gave them 4 presets, which means they invented 21. And in the 50 years before, they had been in 1. And they didn't change their operational budget. All we did is we asked them, take money that you had dedicated for capital expenditure and invest it into the infrastructure of flexibility. Okay, so with that was at the core of both the theaters that I'm going to show. I'm actually showing them a little bit out of sequence, in large part because the Lindemann at Brown University is a bit more like the Wiley, although we started it 4 years after the Perelman at the World Trade Center, and it finished about 3.5 weeks after the Perelman. When we started the project, Brown approached us with an interesting problem. They wanted to become the creative ivy. They wanted to infuse all of their intellectual pursuits with the arts, and they wanted the arts to equally draw in all of these peripheral intellectual pursuits that were happening on campus. So they wanted to have dancers working with applied computational mathematics students. They wanted chemistry students working with people who were doing sound stages and so forth. That's the idea that they wanted. And our reaction was that we could actually solve that in 2 different ways. And I'll go into each one with some depth. But they also put the building dead center in the middle of campus with the idea that it would become a new campus epicenter. I'm not sure necessarily why I'm showing you this slide as I'm saying that, but I didn't know where else to put it. But this is at the core of the problem that they had. And they hadn't found their way out of it. They thought when we started the project that we were going to do only the thing on the left. And that was to create a hyper-flexible building similar to the Wiley. But interesting enough, what they also really needed was a space for a symphony orchestra. The Brown Orchestra is very good. It is effectively Providence's orchestra. So they not only have the students coming, but they also have the city around it. It's like, I think Providence has like 210,000 people, so it's a small city. They're coming to the student performances. And they could fundraise for that and they couldn't necessarily fundraise for that. And that was the problem that we started in. And we asked them, as we typically do, and did it also in the library, let's suspend design for a bit and let's talk, think about how we can solve the problem. And an interesting observation was made, which was programmatic, that changed the entire direction of the project. And that was, because Brown is small and Providence is small, when they say, I need a symphony orchestra with 105 pieces and an 80-person chorus performing, what they mean is to a crowd of 550 to 600. That is weird. Right? Symphony orchestras, the symphony halls, typically have 1,800 to 2,400 seats. And the problem is, it's a lot of acoustic energy, and you're trying to hold it in this big space with lots of people, and there's simply no way to take that and shut it down to turn that also into a theater or a chamber opera or a small ensemble space. So it basically was considered to be a holy grail. You can't do it. But when you start out with the weirdness of, I'm going to have basically a third the people on stage that I have in the audience, then you can shut it down as long as you can take that acoustic volume and push it up into the air. So the building has this weird kind of stovepipe hat profile because we're trying to capture all that acoustic volume. And effectively, what we convinced them to do was to increase the capital budget by about 30%, such that we could create 5 buildings in one instead of 2 in one, which is how we were originally commissioned. And so these are the presets there. They are presets that are not only organizational, but they are also typological. So experimental media cube, recital hall, end stage theater and dance, symphony orchestra hall, and then flat floor, something kind of like the Armory. And I'm going to take you through them. So I want you to watch every surface. Every surface in the building moves. It is not quite push of a button. There still needs to be humans that help this happen, but it is by far the most automated building, theater building, performing arts building in the world. So every surface changes. So we're going to start, and we're going to go to the multimedia. And the first thing you see the back wall moves in, the ceiling comes down, side walls come in, and it creates a small cube. Now we're going to go to a recital configuration. Jay here is shaking his head because he knows the insanity of what he went through on that. Now the back wall is going to go back. The side walls will come, all 4 of them will come in, and the ceiling will come down and create a very low and geometric top. This is now a perfect shoebox small ensemble space. Now we're going to go to the end stage theater and dance configuration. Don't really need the ceiling much for acoustics. The 2 western walls go out in order to create basically a fly tower. The 2 eastern ones come in, and a deep rake comes out of the floor. And now we're going to go to the orchestra configuration, where everything moves out. The ceiling takes a very specific acoustic geometry. And then the last is the Armory configuration, sort of a big art space, which they can do whatever they want to. So let me show you some of what that looks like. Okay, so this is the space. I'm going to show you a video of it transforming in a moment, but this is the space. This was opening night, and you can see it's got a 105-person orchestra with an 80-person chorus. That is Itzhak Perelman, and I'm going to tell a story about him in a moment. Dance theater configuration, the multimedia configuration. This is being used, Carrie Mae Weems' installation, sort of an Armory configuration, and then the opening night banquet. So you see how quickly they can turn it around. So this is the time lapse. We sped it way up, so I don't think you want to hear it. And so you can see that there are people in the space. I will say that this is really early on, some of the first transformations we did. They're now able to do it with just 4 people in several hours. The building has we call NISCON systems. These are high-performance lasers that make sure that when you start to move something, if someone puts their hand in the middle, it doesn't take their hand off, the whole building will shut down. it's going to get, in a moment, it's going to get there. That was the thing I most want you to see. We don't yet have something with the ceiling actually moving into a larger geometry, but that's what I wanted to discuss about with Itzhak Perelman, is that, with these transforming buildings, they have they're notorious for being good for a lot and great for nothing. And probably the most skeptical group that we were dealing with was the music department. They were concerned about the acoustic quality of the space. And when we first had the orchestra in the space to do a tuning session, the orchestra was there, but also a lot of the professors. And while they were playing Mahler's Fourth, we just started changing the ceiling. And at some point, the conductor stopped and went, "Wait, what are you doing? What just happened? Go back, change it." So they started to play again, and we started to adjust again. And he went, "Whoa, whoa, whoa, stop, stop." And then the timp player was like, "Whoa, whoa, whoa," right? And they started going bonkers because they realized the building was a huge instrument. And what I was referencing about Itzhak Perelman is that what he performed was a piece that he said historically he'd never been able to do it right, because you either hear the orchestra and it drowns him out, or you hear him and you can't hear the orchestra. And we can change the ceiling real time. It's not just when we switch from one configuration to another, and it's not just amongst movements. You can literally change the ceiling during a movement. And so during the initial performance, we took the ceiling and we adjusted it just as he was starting the long cadenza. And he came out afterwards and he was just like, "I've never had this experience." And people in the audience were like, it was crazy because I could hear his fingers on the fret. This is Jay's work. What I'm now going to say is, if you want to do buildings like this, the best way to do them is to always keep in mind that you shouldn't be doing it. And what I mean by that is, if you want it to move, you're making a mistake. You should only make it move when you feel you can do no other and you've really queried it completely. So the building is essentially just a huge bridge with gantries. Right? In the office, we use the expression dumb. We say, "Dare to be dumb." And for us, dumb isn't pejorative. Dumb means you've basically sussed it out by making it as dumb as it possibly can be, and that's how you're going to make it successful. So these are gantries, like industrial gantries on a big bridge. That's how this is moving. The acoustic baffles, when you go to the US Open, you'll see a camera zooming around the space. Right? It's on guy wires. You know that that's fail-safe because if they broke and they killed 30 people at the US Open, the US Open would cease to exist. And you know that it's not going to break because they need it in order to make the money on television. So we use the exact same systems to be able to control the ceiling. So the ceiling can do any individual thing, and they can create massive geometries together. We can use them independently as a theatrical component. And this was just something we did for fun. We took the whole ceiling and just dropped it down to 8 feet just to see what the space was like. These elements allow us, when the balconies are moving, to maintain the egress routes. These are the backs of fire trucks. Again, fire truck, the back of the hydraulic element of a fire truck doesn't work. People die. We know it works. Dumb. These are the movable battens and so forth. So you can start to see how the propagation of technology, we always go back to this idea of dare to be dumb. So that was the first idea. And the second idea is we cut this transparent swath right through the entirety of the building. So the first one, that was programmatic. Right? I said that they wanted to create a building that infused the arts into the environment and the environment into the arts, environment being their intellectual environment. Programming was one way to do that. So we created this instrument that allowed them to do it. But the other was to do it literally. Could we create ability for students to walk through the building and literally watch the creation of art when the artists feel comfortable having them do it? And the areas even like sound and light locks, we perpetuated that idea by having everything be highly reflective. But you can see in the main hall that the entire ground floor, the first 8.5 feet, is a glass enclosure. And so this is what happens, that you have people performing, you have students walking by and engaging the daily creation of art. And of course that can be closed down so they can not be seen if they don't want to, and if they want to create a conventional blocked out space. But the way we did that was, again, through sort of dumb means. From an acoustic standpoint, again, we started with a shoebox. That's the glass shoebox. I think most people think that glass is a terrible acoustic surface. Generally, it is, but it is not for the first 8 feet. First 8 feet, you actually want to use it to propagate the high-frequency sounds into the rest of the space. So creating these glass shells that have openings so that some of the high-pitched frequency would actually get in here and rattle about and then come back in was actually super productive and makes the building have an incredibly high acoustic performance. This is the geometry that is the overall acoustic signature, and then we use the outboard layer to cut out in the airspace between the outboard insulated glass units and this to cut out all the low frequency that might be coming from the outside. So if you've got trucks with air brakes or a Harley Davidson, you can't hear it. So that's basically the makeup that sound from the outside in going bottom to top would have to go through, or the sound from the inside going from the top to the bottom would bounce off of. And there you can see the different layers. And then the last thing I was going to say is that then we use this. I have a personal affinity for fluting. I don't know why. So it has this fluted exterior, and then we took that as a motif, and it ran into everything. So you see this fluting in all the different kinds of seating elements and the facade, and what it does on the exterior building. Now, part of the reason we did this is that it was the only way we felt that we could create a, quote, contextual building. Providence is an old city. They have a lot of relief in their buildings, and they knew we were going to do a very contemporary building, and this was a way to allow us to do that. Still have that relief, but do contemporary. I will say, when we talked to the Providence Preservation Society, tongue-in-cheek, we were honest about our being facetious, but we said it's fluted columns. That idea, fluting, we also obsessively had used it in a project that we opened in 2020 in Washington, D.C. But here the fluting had a very different purpose. This was to create an office building that was set the new standard for Class A office buildings, office space in D.C., which really is about transparency. And so by curving the glass, we actually can make it mullionless, right? Because the glass is self-structured, so there's no vertical mullion. What you're seeing there, that is literally just, the framing, so there's no structural import whatsoever. In fact, we didn't really need it, but the client wanted it. Just they felt more comfortable. It's a relatively conservative client. But it makes this sort of remarkably translucent skin, because not only is the glass made thinner, and you eliminate, well, not only do you eliminate the mullion because it's curved, but you can also make the glass thinner. So basically it has it's almost like saran wrap. Weirdly, because we were eliminating all of that secondary structural steel and so forth, it also drove the cost down. And through an interesting procurement process that I won't go into, we basically bought this out at about 5% more than bog standard commodity curtain wall. And then to offset it, and there's going to be an interesting segue. This is all, I'm talking now about predilections. To offset the kind of crystalline quality of the building, we then infused the lobby with this incredibly rich Persian onyx and tightly spaced flooring, which I'll talk about in a moment. It's a sapelate mahogany. Again, you see this predilection for fluting. So that's a segue to the Perelman at the World Trade Center, because it's covered in stone. That was my rationale from going from A to B there. So the Perelman was a 9-year labor of love, and there was several things that stood out about it. Obviously, the proximity to the World Trade Center. We're 50 feet away from the memorial. And the other is that it's an unusual kind of performance house because they were only going to produce and co-produce original work, which means small, highly flexible venues. The smallest configuration we have is 50 seats, and the largest is 950 seats. So it's and the average is closer to 450. So it is not a Broadway theater by any means. And that was the starting point of the project. And in that context, we felt it was very important to do something that was pure and elegant, that had a kind of sobriety that was appropriate to the memorial right across the street, but that as the memorial goes quiet in the evenings, that it would assert a kind of respectful independence. And that was where the notion of wrapping the building in a very thin, translucent stone. It's about a ½ inch thick, 12 millimeters thick. It sits in an IGU where it's laminated on both sides to protect on hysteresis, and then it's put into an IGU. The outboard layer of glass, we worked with Savasa in Italy to develop a product that looks like honed stone, which is why most people don't realize that the outboard surface is not stone. And in fact, to my great delight, there's a pundit, an architectural pundit in New York, who is pretty negative, likes to tear apart buildings, and when the building started going up, he basically wrote, oh, I shouldn't have said he. That already gives you some idea, maybe 50% now, you know. He said, you know, these people are idiots. Don't they know that stone is porous and the stone's going to pop off? To which I wrote back, thank you for affirming that we did this really well, because you don't know that there's glass in the outboard of the building. But the stone also has an incredible impact that then on the interior of the building, you get this incredible amber glow. The stone has ferric oxide in it. It's literally what turns the building orange, amber colored. It is not the coloring of the lights. It is entirely illuminated. I'll show in you can see it a little bit there. These are the smaller ones, but there are these chandeliers that run around the perimeter that light the floor, the circulation, but they also illuminate the facade. But what's important about the building is what's hiding on the interior, right? The instrument that enables them to be able to, they said it was a very beautiful challenge because they are trying to make a building for work that's in production, right? Nascent work, things that they're producing, co-producing. It's unknown. They're going to have exceptional artists, but they may not be great pieces, or they may be great pieces, or they may be great pieces that are in their early stages. This is going to be rough work. It's going to be things that challenge people. We need a building that responds to the art and not the other way around, right? Not that the art is forced to respond to the building, which is how most performing arts buildings operate. So sitting in the middle of the building is an L of reconfigurable theaters, right? Nominally large, medium, and small. And the last quadrant is rehearsal spaces, scene elevator, and so forth. So there's the three. They are subdivided, however, by 4 massive acoustic guillotine walls, 2 at 46 tons each and 2 at 23 tons each. There you see them operate. These are moved with scoreboard lifts. Again, dumb technology, taking technology from other sources that we know is tried and true and warranted and applying it here. They move in about 15 seconds. And they allow this system not to be 3 theaters, but actually 10 possible different proportions. And then within each one of those proportions, there's multiple stage audience configurations. So by the time we opened the building, we actually opened it already with 62 fully approved stage audience configurations that we have. It is literally in a binder, and I can only hear Mitt Romney talking about binders of women whenever I say it. But we have a binder of theater configurations that we give to artists. And then not only it is a multi-form theater, but it is a multi-processional theater. So around the perimeter and through them is a cruciform, and anything in that zone can be defined as front of house or back of house through massive acoustic doors. So you could have 3 distinct theaters. This is kind of like the base condition, right? Public circulating around the perimeter, and the center cruciform is all back of house. But you could have a bicameral situation in which people are coming in on the east side for a 7 o'clock performance. People come in separated on the west side for a 7:30 performance. You could have the central zone become a lobby, or they can create, elements, almost like a palate cleanser that you move through in order to put you into the headspace of a performance, or it gets you into the suspension of disbelief. You could have the public have a Wagnerian experience where they encircle a performance and everyone comes from every side into a theater in the round. And then any combination and permutation that you can imagine of circulation and configuration. So that's why, I think early on I talked about the Lindemann being an instrument. This one is not as automated, but it's not as automated because with that incredible array of configurations, we had to be strategic about what was automated and what was manual. And I'll show a little bit of that in a moment, but just to give you some sense of what this looks like, this is people moving around the perimeter. This is now all back of house. This is obviously, maybe not obviously, but using this as a lobby, one of these palette cleansers. This is a true Wagnerian experience with the public. There is no procession. You just move directly into the stage. And then looking from the interior, for various reasons, but for security, it's hard to photograph the building. So we don't have, I'll show some in a moment, but moving from theater in the round to an end stage, to a deep end stage, to an even deeper rock concert configuration. Okay, then I'll talk over this, but this is starting to show, so you'll see how it's less automated, but in some ways it's a much more facile kit of parts, tools that we have in order to go through these different configurations. Okay, you get the point. Oh, there it is. So the big walls you can see here, these are the massive hooks that we use for the from the scoreboard lift. These are one of the most beautiful pieces of technology I've ever seen, but it's used for moving very, very large and heavy objects, usually in storage facilities, and we use that to convert the floor system. These are not, so this is that moment that the antihistamines kicked in. They are not hydraulics. This is literally a rigid tube that's being fabricated out of something about this tall with basically a bicycle derailleur railer, right? Element that's sitting in a drum. This is a removable gridiron that allows them to have similar heights. If they want the mid-size to have the same height as the small, they can add this gridiron. These are some of the movable balconies, and then the movable seat sets. What I actually want to talk about for a brief moment is then the difficulty of acoustics, because in this building, there's a lot of what I call productively losing control, which is to say that we kept coming, both with the composition of the facade, but also with the acoustics, coming into situations in which a very fixed approach wouldn't solve the problem. And what I mean by that is that acoustically, this is a perfect storm. You have 10 proportions. You have 62 stage audience configurations. So you don't know where the stage is. You don't know where the people are. You don't know how many people. You don't know the proportion. You don't know if the performers are spoken word or instrument. You don't know if they're amplified or if they're acoustic. Right? It's a nightmare. And we worked with the same acoustician on both projects. It was clear in the Lindemann how we were solving that problem. But here, he came up with a really beautiful idea. And he said, give me a forest clearing. Why a forest clearing? Two reasons. The first is what we call boundaryless space. Any sound that goes out into it doesn't hit a really clearly defined thing, and so someone who's very acoustically astute doesn't hear a defined shape. But every bit of acoustic energy will hit something, and it will always come back. It'll hit a leaf, it'll hit a branch, it'll hit a tree trunk. It always comes back into the space. So it holds onto the energy, and then that's an ideal environment within which we can use variable acoustics. So hiding above the gridirons are variable acoustic elements that allow us to turn any surface into it being absorptive or reflective or inert. So they can tune it based on what they're doing. But the second I thought was even more beautiful, which is boundaryless space, or I really should say a forest clearing. Over millions of years of evolution, our ears were basically evolved for what? Do people know? Like, what's the primary purpose of our hearing? Partly for communication, maybe significantly for communication. But communication, when we speak, you don't need a sophisticated acoustic receptor. Predators. Where? Forest clearings. It's where we slept, not caves. Not a lot of caves in the world. Lots of forest clearings. So our ears are incredibly adept at hearing nuance in a forest clearing. The problem was, how do you make a forest clearing cheaply? Like that was the problem. How do you make it cheaply? And the solution was dumb. This is the world's most engineered crown molding. We did about 50,000 iterations with the acoustician. There were just 3 geometries. You can see them up here. Those geometries, there's the prime, and of course they can be flipped, right? Anyone can be like this or like this. Each geometry has one has 1 scoop, one has 2 scoops, and one has 3 scoops. And we can have 36 pairs, and we can have 216 triples. So you start to have an unbelievable number of combinations and permutations, and we varied the widths between them, and we varied the depths behind them. And so that was actually how we were able to make, inexpensively, a forest clearing. And then the other drove Jay bonkers, and I won't even give it into the complexity of the structure, but for various crazy reasons, we didn't have a lot of columns on site. They came up and they rationalized themselves into a big plate, and then we tied that plate to the rest of the building with a big mega truss. Jay will say that I'm unable to do buildings without huge belt trusses. It's true. We've never done one. And weirdly enough, that created a massive bucket that we could use to our advantage. The building is sitting over 4 stories of Port Authority infrastructure. It's sitting over all of the PATH trains. It's sitting over the #1 Cortlandt Street subway. It's sitting under, there's a huge vehicular roundabout that goes underneath the entire World Trade Center site that connects to all the below-grade loading docks. You access that by coming into the back of our building, getting checked for explosives, and going down a huge, let's see if it was in there or not, if you can see it. Yeah, that's what's hiding here. This roundabout there that sits under our building connects to a loading dock. So all this stuff that rumbles, the last place in the world you want to put a performing arts center is low frequency vibration. But we had this big bucket, and so we built the theaters as fully isolated structures, isolated from each other and isolated from the rest of the building inside that big bucket. And that's why when the building was going up, people said, why are you building little buildings inside the big building? And we said, because we're building little buildings inside the big building. And so that, now I can come full circle and talk about where I started in the beginning of, we wanted to create, we wrapped the building in the translucent stone, and it was hiding this incredibly dynamic thing. I will also add that it was a requirement to drape the building in something, because part of the design guidelines dictated that we could not see any kind of commercial activity from the memorial. So you couldn't see ticket sales, you couldn't see intermission, you couldn't see the restaurant and bar. So that was also a dictate. I'll also say that the building, as I mentioned, this first 21 feet isn't ours. We designed it, but that's all part of the Port Authority infrastructure. So there are a lot of, I think, unusual moves, twists in terms of the project that most people assume came out of desire, and they came out of actually obligation, and then trying to find an interesting way to solve it. But to come back to what I was saying is that we realized at some point there was a beautiful tension between the simplicity of the enclosure and the dynamism of the interior. And we started calling it the magic box, right? This idea that instead of a building revealing itself to you over time, that the more you use the building, actually the more it confuses you over time, the more it mystifies you over time. You simply don't understand how all this different stuff is happening within this relatively small building. All right, and then just to show you the few images that I've surreptitiously taken over the last couple months of the different things going inside. And then just a few more random photos. Oh, actually, there was a point to this, which is to say that it was interesting how that led to also using devices for suspension of disbelief. Yes, we had to put the lobby 21 feet in the air. That was a given. But ascending up into an opaque or a translucent thing creates suspension of disbelief, right? You're rising up into a world that then, once you get on the inside, you can no longer orient yourself. Now, if you can't orient yourself, you still have to navigate, which is why, again, the navigation is dumb. Anyone can find their seat, but they don't know where north is. And then you go from these incredibly tall spaces through an 8-foot tall sound and light lock. Spatial compression is another historic device that architects used for creating suspension of disbelief. Okay, so now I'm going to talk about, how are we doing? Okay, we're about 55 minutes. I have like, well, I'll just keep going. If you guys want to leave, you just leave. I don't, So then the third one I want to talk about we call flexible array. This one, we really were exploring to be the anecdote to the white cube spaces, right, in museum projects. But subsequently, we started to find it had incredible usage in other typologies as well. But let me first start with it being the antithesis of the white cube. Basically, the thought was, are any of you artists? I mean, there are a lot of architects. How many of you are also artists, or just artists, period? The fear of the blank page. This is one of my own zinc plates in graduate school, where I think, like most people, I would just to take the zinc plates and just scratch them on a concrete column. Don't tell. I used to do that actually in Le Corbusier's building. Don't tell anyone. Or putting acid on it so that people who are painters, they will gesso their canvas with newspaper or whatever, so that they have something with which or against which to work, and they find that freeing. Well, I think it's similarly true of institutions who are trying to curate exhibitions. So this was that idea. How do we create an array, a kind of predefined array with which or against which curators could work? And this started out for a museum that we're doing in Oslo. I will say that we actually won this competition 3 times and still didn't get to build it. It just opened from a Spanish architect. But let me talk about the 2 underlying ideas. The first was, okay, don't do a white cube. Create a series of, that takes a huge amount of money to transform. Give them a palette of very, very different architectural experiences. And then second, is don't organize them in the classic Western idea of a linear museum. Why? Because what that means is you have to always do massive shows, right? If you start to strike something in one room and it is this kind of linear necklace of gallery spaces, you have to shut the entire museum down. Anyone who lives or goes to New York knows that it's an infernal experience because they are never open, because that's how they're all organized. And so the idea was instead put all the assembly elements in the middle so they could access any one of the galleries individual, and had the public circulate around the perimeter so that you could install or deinstall without taking the whole building down. Those were the 2 initial ideas, and it led to this plan. We were doing this in a competition, and so we couldn't work with the client to come up with the different typologies, which is why we're showing these in gray, but these were the different experiences that we had. So this was their national museum in Norway, which was near the site. This is, sorry, I should say, this is an Edvard Munch museum. And so this is Munch's studios in Eckley. This is the Frick in New York. This is any number of Frank Gehry galleries. This is the Neue National Gallery. This is any number of galleries in Chelsea and New York. This is any number of Renzo Piano galleries. This was a ripoff of our own museum that we did. It's the shortest building of all time. It lasted for about 9 months for the Guggenheim and Hermitage museums in Las Vegas. So that was us reinstating it. And then the public would then move around the perimeter, poking into any of these different gallery types. And this was what the power of this idea of flexible array would get them. They could do one huge show. They could do 8 distinct shows. They could almost have an experience like the Louisiana Museum in Denmark, where you go into a gallery, then you come out and have a palette cleanser with this amazing view, and then you go into another one, right? This is built in the middle of the Oslo fjord. But there's another benefit. Weirdly, their program asked for 5/8 contemporary galleries and 3/8 classical galleries, which seemed odd given what their collection was and the kinds of, it was the Munch and Stennerson collections. And so we provided that, but similar to what we were doing here, we created different forms of flexibility, each one of those galleries, such that 4 of the 5 contemporary galleries could also morph into classical galleries. So they could have a building that was basically almost all a contemporary building or almost all a classical building. And some of them could also move further to create something that was the size of the turbine hall at the Tate Modern. And so then it creates this, which again, I would call some kind, it's not quite a tool, but that's why we call it a flexible array. And again, I'll go back to that initial reference of a zinc plate that, because I was terrified, I put something into it so that I was reacting. I didn't have to work against a blank canvas. I just think the section's nice, so there's the section. And at night. Now, this is an idea that we've, to this day, have not convinced someone. We keep coming in second. This is the Museum of the 21st Century in Berlin. It is directly opposite of the Neue Nationalgalerie by Mies. And so we wanted to do literally the updated version, test out our idea compared to Mies's version of the white cube. It has probably my favorite plan that we've ever done. This is one of the two floors. Basically, we gave them a gradated grid in which on one corner you have really big and it goes to really small. And this was super tall. The upper floor had ramping such that this is super tall and this is super short. And the next one was the opposite. So you had a really tall one here and a really small one that's really short. So they had this incredible array of different gallery dimensions, and then it's punctuated by different things. And I didn't want to go into this one, but so some have a cupola, and some have different kind of architectural experiences. Some are double height, some have skylights, some don't. But what was interesting, and I probably should have kept the diagram in, is that what it meant is that instead of there's a really beautiful museum by Sejima Nishizawa called the Kanazawa Museum. And it is a field of different dimension boxes, and that's great. But it's a navigational nightmare. And they have a problem because all they can do, they can use the dimensions they've got, or they can take the big ones and make them small. So they can have mixed or all small. And the advantage of this is that it is incredibly banal to navigate, and you could do a show here and have big, or you could do a show here and have small, or you could subdivide and have different dimensions. So it actually weirdly gave them the full spectrum of flexibility within something that you think is incredibly rigid. It was interesting to see when you really start to map out how they would use the gallery, the advantages it gave them. Okay, so that was some of the explorations into museums, but then we realized that this idea had power. In fact, we were doing these competitions at the same time we were doing this residence and didn't realize that they were both using the same idea about flexibility. So this is a house. It is a very big, very expensive house. So we typically call it a mid-sized cultural institution that someone's going to live in. It is on an extraordinary piece of property. And we won it through a competition. Normally wouldn't do competitions for houses, but this was obviously a unique challenge or opportunity. The brief was really unusual. There was a patriarch who had 4 children, and he wants the children to live with him. So he wanted a house for him, his 4 children, and their future families. Kind of an odd request. He also wanted it to largely be on one floor so that he could spend the rest of his life here. So if he became wheelchair bound, he could access all the different residences. He wanted it not to be a compound. He wanted it to be a single structure. He wanted a grand American stair, which I have to admit, I have no idea what that means. And lastly, he said the thing that terrified me is I wanted to look like it has always been there. And we knew that there were other people in the competition who do that really well. And we frankly didn't know why we were in the competition. People whose firms might sound like AMSA. No, I guess we would. Okay. So our approach was to take these elements and wrap them into a ring. We call it the necklace resonance. We put his residence for he and his wife at the kind of promontory. So it has this kind of ideal where his residence is actually at the ocean, but as you go into the site, it's this incredible old growth forest. And so the building, and it slopes down going into the water, but it also slopes down going into the old growth forest. And so the building starts on the footprint of an existing building. So we didn't use the foundations, but we weren't clearing more trees than we had to. We started there, and then it kind of goes out into the middle of the forest. So you can see it gets up to some areas almost 35 feet up in the air. So you get this kind of incredible treehouse-like. So half the building's at the beach and half the building is a treehouse in the middle of the woods. But this is the idea of flexibility. So he really was clear that he basically wanted us to make something for him that he would design with us, and then 4 generic houses for his kids. We thought this was a terrible idea for a whole host of reasons. One, first, we didn't think his kids were going to live with him when we told him that, and we said that's not the way to get your kids to come live with you, is to give them a bunch of generic condos. But second, let's say they do want to live with you, wouldn't it be great if they had difference and they could say, you know, this house more suits my lifestyle and that one suits more this child's lifestyle, or they don't live with him and they timeshare. Okay, at Christmas, I want the dice house, and at Thanksgiving, I want the barcode house, and so forth. I won't tell you which ones, but if you squint, these are all based on what I think are the most important modern American, or mid-century modern houses in America. They just have references about basically organization and how one might live within them. There you see the plan. This is the courtyard in the center. It has quaking aspens so that you can still, you know, it gives a canopy, but you can see across. This was a very intentional thing. A lot of things I told him he didn't like, and one I said is, you know, you're gunning to be the world's biggest empty nester. So all of these houses, which have their living spaces and their dining rooms facing the central courtyard, have big pivot walls, such that if the kids are not there, they close. And the experience of the father and mother then would be their residence, the 2 communal pavilions, and then this trapped secret garden. But they don't see the emptiness of their children who don't live with them. There you can see one of the two we call modern American stairs. We didn't know what that was, so we just took the interior wall that was running around and it just sort of squished them into these pavilions. This is the other one. These are the most complicated structural things that we have ever designed. You can see some of the structural analyses. This is the one thing that I'm showing that Jay did not do. And then these are some of the mock-ups. Really, really sophisticated structural system and cladding system. And we have to actually, you know, all these things had to be rationalized such that we could create foam formwork that we are slumping the veneers onto in order to make different panels. But you can see actually the insanity of how accurate these people. It's a German fabricator and a German veneer company. You can see how incredibly, that's not really working, how incredibly accurate they are. And we were playing with 2 different woods. That's why you see that one is oak and one is mahogany. And then the last thing was, how do we solve this problem of making a house that looks like it has always been there? Our response was, because we don't know how to do that, and we would do it badly if we tried, let's make a house that looks like it has never been there. And so there is a pun that I think only architects will get, in which we took the detailing of the Farnsworth house, and then we wrapped it in one-way mirror glass. So the whole building is a huge mirror, which weirdly had a totally unexpected side effect, which is, this is in a very wealthy neighborhood. They had to go get planning approvals. We were consolidating basically instead of building 36 McMansions, they were going to build this. It was smaller than the total aggregate, so there was reason to let us do it. And it wasn't going to be 36 septic systems. It was going to be one. You know, all kinds of 4 cars, not 120 cars, et cetera. But it was going to be a big thing. And weirdly, when it went through the public commentary, the neighbors actually received it very well because it was disappearing into the landscape. It was one of those moments where you kind of went, I don't believe it. I don't know what else to say. It was kind of remarkable about how that happened. There you see it now at night. This is some of the facade mock-ups. Here you see the steel is under construction. Very difficult structural problem because you have some that are anchored and you have some that are out sort of literally floating in the wind. And so from a structural standpoint, this is a very kind of unique challenge. Okay, so I have 2 more ideas I want to put forward. They're both much more nascent. The first one I call intensification. And the best example but this is also something we did with Jay. So even our losers we did with Jay. This is an opera house in Shenzhen, which we came in third in the competition. And one of the other people that we worked with on this building here came in second, unfortunately. So let me go back to this image. They asked for a kind of a sad thing. They just kept saying icon, 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 icon all over it. Like, that's all this said in the entire brief. It's like a 180-page, very complicated brief, and it said icon like 2,000 times. And the problem with, you try to build an icon, you probably aren't going to. I will say that the winner tried to build an icon, and it won, and you can say what you will about it. But and the other thing, though, is that they were going to build this on a man-made piece of land and then put this massive, sprawling complex on it. And this is a city that doesn't have any public space. So that was the challenge as we saw it. How can we make an icon, but actually that there's a reason for the iconography, that it's performative, and that we can resuscitate all of this land? And so there are two exemplars. Like, this whole idea of the large opera house that has multi-facilities, it comes from the late 50s. The two archetypes are Lincoln Center and the Sydney Opera House. They are programmatically almost identical. They all have these, both have these four: an opera house, a multifunctional theater, concert hall, and operetta. And weirdly, they both started construction in 1959. And everyone has been modeling which one since. The one on the right. We found the one on the left, maybe it's because we're New Yorkers, the more inspiring one. What is the idea behind it? Is that they strategically move these different elements around on the site to create a really important carve out of public space within the notorious Manhattan grid. And then, because they were all done by different architects, they used the notion of motifs to allow each one to have uniqueness, variance within it. That's the first model. The second model is Sydney. And while I think Sydney is extraordinary, it has created the scourge of what we like to call the blanket of iconography, which is, forget the stuff that we're designing. It's all about the big, super exciting blanket that we're going to put on top of it, and it's going to be super expensive. Damn all the performing arts infrastructure beneath it. And if you know these projects, you know that this is the typology that everyone is doing. So how could we do something that was counter to that? We started with Lincoln Center, and we did what everyone thought was insane. We stacked it to great potential effect, right? So now we're not building a superfluous structure to give it its iconography. It clearly has iconography. We're freeing up the ground plane to become the first major public park in Shenzhen. But there was this idea of intensification at play also, which I think that because architects, because we don't spend enough time being obsessed about the pragmatics of what we're designing, that we miss these incredible opportunities. This is the building sort of X-rayed. Sitting in the middle of it is this structural tower. And in that structural tower, that holds the whole building up, is the most insane set of redundant vertical circulation you can imagine. And we're not asking for more vertical circulation than they would have built. We are asking for more shaftway, but not more elevators, not more elevator motors and so forth. We're just asking for them to be organized in a very specific way. Why? Because what most architects don't think about in these situations is that from a staffing standpoint, if you look at Lincoln Center and you look at the Sydney Opera House, they cannot afford to have these places be operating simultaneously. So they will have, in the ballet, it will start at 6:30. You ever wonder why Lincoln Center Ballet starts early? Well, because they're not as powerful as the symphony, and they're not as powerful as the Metropolitan ARPA, so they get the worst start time, 6:30. They start, all the ticket people and docents and everybody else, they go over to the Symphony Hall. They start at 7:15. I get that out of the way, and then they all go over to the Met. Met gets the best time. Right, so the reality is these things are not being used contemporaneously. The performances are, but they are very sophisticatedly staggered so that they're actually not happening at any one moment, which means if you've just built all those elevators, and we actually proposed fewer elevators than we would have necessarily done if these were all sitting on the ground. First, you create the most, for us it was the most exciting section we'd ever done. If you start doing a hardcore elevatoring analysis, the performance is unreal. Look at the times. So before performance, worst average waiting time during any 5-minute period, 1.9 seconds, 14.8 seconds, 12.4 seconds. 20 minutes to get everyone out of a major symphony hall is considered exceptional. 7 minutes, 9 minutes, 13, yeah, the multifunctional theater, it's getting close to the high end of exceptional, but it's still in the range of exceptional. Right, so that was the power of the stacking. And think of the iconographic benefits and the the advantages of what you got in terms of the ground plane. And then we just programmed each one of them with very unique motifs. So this was the opera house, and it had this kind of sunrise motif. You can see it's in the lights, it's in the screens, it's in the main chandelier within the opera house. And then this was the starburst motif. This was for the Symphony Hall. Again, chandeliers, it's in the screens. And in the main hall, it's in the organ that we also used as an acoustic reflector for the space. And the other result of this was that we had a ground plane that we proposed to just plant with these super quick growing grasses. They'll grow to about this tall in about 2.5 months. And then you just mow different things into it. So in this case, you're mowing in like the king, Storm King, it's a sculpture garden. This is some large event space, so they mowed it all down towards the water. This is just weird follies. This is, I don't know what, but just get the sense of now they have this canvas, also flexible, to be able to use this big civic public space and design it, and then in 3 months, it's an entirely new thing. Okay, so the last one I'm just going to talk about for 1 minute because it's something that we've just started working on. It's weird to even show you. You're going to see us doing renderings out of Enscape. But we're working on a really interesting typology for Kia. They've asked us to do 2 epicenter dealerships because they're consolidating all their dealerships in Korea into just a few structures, but they want it also to be civic buildings so they can do performances and other kinds of elements into it. And I'm not going to say much about it. And just as intensification, we're not quite sure how this fits. This one, I don't know what this is. This is basically just making a pure tool. That's the best way I can describe it. Where if I think about the Perelman and the Lindemann as being instruments, this one's more a tool. It's a little bit less poetic. So of course display of automobiles was important, but the ability to radically reconfigure the spaces, they will move the cars in and out on a daily basis and different things. So we wrapped the building in a double skin in which the outboard layer was this, again, fluting. In this case, we're trying Audis. We've never done Audis, so we're going to do Audis. And there is a curtain that runs around the interior, but there's also a curtain, series of curtains that happen on the interior that allow them to reconfigure the space. Again, we're literally weeks into this. So you can see how they can start to transform the geometries of the space at very low cost. We're also looking at doing this with walls as opposed to curtains. So there you see a walled version. Someone in the office said this looks like cells that are bifurcating. And there you see the overall structure. It's in the heart of Seoul. As you can see, MKA hasn't yet helped us with the structure because there isn't any. Derek Beeman, who notably is not here, is not yet panicking over this. And the idea is that within that double skin, the curtains, which not only can reveal things, can black things out, because they'll do VR in here, they'll do all kinds of things, but it can also, if they want the building to be highly transparent, they can actually get the idea of a totally transparent building with the curtain that's within the double skin actually is rotating with the sun. So it allows it to have complete transparency on any of the faces. Did everyone know what the idea of a double skin, how it operates? I mean, the notion is that you create an air cavity, and then you put something into the air cavity that is a sacrificial layer that heats up, and you've created a vent stack. So you can, in the summertime, it just flushes all the heat out. So you can actually have layers that are not that insulated. And then in the winter, you can actually take all that heat and pull it into the building and heat the building with it. We don't see it a lot in America because we don't like to maintain our buildings. But in other cultures, they actually spend a lot of money to maintain the building. And so this idea has a lot of legs. But the beauty of it is it means you can use literally purely transparent glass. So like these renderings aren't a deceit. That's literally, they don't have to have, they have low E coatings, but you can use like a transparent one or a silver one. So that is the last one, which I can't really say much about, other than it seems like some kind of viable next future of this exploration. I've talked for a long time, so I will leave it for all of you. If you want questions, that's fine. If you don't want to, it's also fine.